Why was the room so quiet when she walked in? Maybe it was the rhythm of her steps, calm, exact, unhurried, that reminded everyone she didn't belong to recovery. She belonged to control. The kind of control that couldn't be taught, only earned after nearly dying for it. The air inside the Naval Rehabilitation Annex carried its own gravity. Filtered, sterile, yet heavy with the smell of chlorine and disinfectant, and something else. Something like waiting. The kind of waiting that only soldiers understood. Men and women who were told they'd already survived the worst, and yet somehow didn't feel alive anymore. Lieutenant Commander Isla, though no one called her by her full name, moved through that wait the way a diver moves through water. Smooth, deliberate. Her uniform sleeves were rolled halfway up, not for comfort but precision. A white armband circled her bicep, limited exertion protocol. Everyone saw it. No one dared ask about it. Because they'd already heard the rumors. SEAL Devgru, Kandahar, blast injury, collapsed lung, still breathing, still walking, still here. She carried a clipboard instead of a rifle now, but her posture hadn't changed. Eyes scanning, shoulders aligned, breathing silent, too silent, like someone who had learned the difference between using oxygen and wasting it. Across the gym, two recruits fumbled with resistance bands. They were new, still thought strength was measured by noise. Isla didn't correct them. She didn't need to. Her eyes followed, her pen marked time. Every inhale, every tremor of weakness noted, logged, catalogued. And then the silence broke. "Ma'am," came a voice behind her, casual, confident, calculated. "Didn't know SEALs came in inhaler models." Corporal Trent Hollies, late 20s, built like someone who looked at mirrors more than maps. His smirk carried that brand of arrogance found in men who had never met consequences sharp enough to scar. His words hung in the air, dripping with false humor. Isla didn't look up. Her eyes remained on the stopwatch ticking in her hand. She simply said quietly, "You're rolling your knees inward every rep, Corporal. That's where your fatigue is leaking, not your lungs, your control." Then she walked away. Hollies blinked, caught between embarrassment and confusion. Around him, a few recruits hid their smiles. He chuckled under his breath, forcing the moment to die. "Guess it's true," he muttered. "Rehab for broken ghosts and paperwork." At the far desk, Nurse Bramley raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She'd seen this before: arrogance testing patients, ignorance testing control. She called out just loud enough for the room to hear, "Fun fact, Corporal. She used to run blackout drills for combat divers. 6 minutes underwater. Recruits fainted. She didn't." The laughter died instantly. Hollies turned back, caught between disbelief and ego. "That true, Commander?" Isla didn't look at him. She just said, "You'll find out soon enough." She didn't raise her voice. Didn't need to. The stillness that followed her words carried its own kind of authority, the kind born in desert silence, in waiting for the sound of your own breath under fire. That night, long after the gym emptied, Hollies would replay that exchange in his head and tell himself it was nothing. Just banter. But deep down, a thread of unease would coil behind his ribs, the kind that whispered you picked the wrong ghost to tease. The next morning, light bled through the skylights in fractured blues. Water shimmered across the tiles, making the air smell like discipline and memory. The pool drills were already underway when Isla entered, clipboard in hand, stopwatch swinging from her thumb. Every breath in that room had rhythm, controlled, synchronized, but not his. Hollies arrived late, wet boots squeaking, grin already loaded. "Morning, ma'am," he said, stepping too close. "Heard today's about balance and breath. Perfect combo, huh?" She didn't respond, only motioned toward the hydro weights by the pool. "Form teams of 2. You're short one, Corporal. Pair with me." The air shifted. Conversation stopped. Someone coughed. Everyone knew what it meant when an instructor chose to demonstrate with you. It wasn't luck, it was a mirror being held up to your mistakes. Holly smirked. "Lucky me." They faced each other side by side. Her stance precise. Feet set, knees aligned, wrists loose but firm. His performative. Shoulders puffed, elbows flared, pretending control. She lifted first, half pace down, half pace up. Every motion measured, controlled. Like her entire body was a metronome set to discipline. He tried to match her rhythm, failed. His ego filled the silence. "Careful, Commander," he muttered low. "Wouldn't want to trigger that inhaler mid-demo." A few glances flickered. A chuckle died before it started. Isla didn't react. She exhaled slowly through her nose and adjusted her stance. "The only thing triggering right now is your lack of control." Her tone was calm, instructional, but it landed sharper than any insult. He smiled through clenched teeth. "Guess we'll see about that." On the next repetition, he overextended. The splash of water caught her boots. He didn't apologize. Instead, he stepped closer, elbow brushed her ribs once, then again, harder. A test. A line. A mistake. The clipboard dropped. Not in anger, in choice. Her hand hovered near his wrist, measuring, calculating. Then, in a motion too small for the untrained eye, she shifted her balance. Weight forward, pivoted heel, subtle torque. He slipped. The bar hit the mat. The water stilled. By the time he blinked, she was already picking up the clipboard, her breathing even. "Maintain spacing," she said. "Next rep begins in 3, 2. No one moved wrong after that. Every recruit followed her count like it was scripture. When the drill ended, she said simply, "You're off rhythm, Corporal. Breath and control aren't the same thing. Learn the difference." He didn't reply. He couldn't. For the first time, that smirk faltered. He rubbed his wrist, realizing she hadn't reacted. She had measured him. From the corner, recruit Maya Chen watched. She'd seen men like Holly's before, and she'd seen women like Isla only once. Silent, precise, dangerous without ever needing to prove it. That evening, the medical annex smelled faintly of antiseptic and metal polish. Isla sat on the diagnostic bench, electrodes tracing her ribs. Dr. Marin adjusted the lung analyzer, 50-something, ex-Navy, slow in speech but not in mind. "Deep breath in," he said. "Hold 3-2, exhale." The monitor beeped, the graph dipped. Marin frowned. "Down 4% since last week. Not critical, but you're edging into restriction range." "It'll bounce back," she said, removing the pads herself. He raised a brow. "You still running drills?" "I'm observing." "That's not what your armband says." She didn't respond. The silence said enough. Marin sighed, crossing his arms. "You know, I read your file. Kandahar, blast wave, collapsed lung. You swam to the evac with 40% function. That right?" 38, she corrected softly. He smiled faintly. "That's not just survival, that's control." She looked past him, eyes distant, hearing the radio crackle, the rubble pressing into her chest, the blood in her mouth. The corpsman yelling, "Stay down, we'll get you out." But she couldn't. The team needed coordinates. Someone had to stay conscious. Pain didn't scare her. Silence did. She exhaled now, steady. "The trick isn't how long you hold your breath," she murmured. "It's how quiet you get while you're doing it." Marin studied her face. "Still, if someone tries the wrong move in that pool, your chest could lock up." "I'll stay vertical," she said. "Oxygen's not loyalty, Commander," he warned. "It doesn't wait around forever." She stood, pulling her jacket closed. "Not everyone learns from breathing, Doctor. Some only learn from running out of it." The next evening, the mess hall buzzed with noise. Metal trays, boots, laughter, recovery through routine. Isla sat near the window, untouched tray beside her, file folder open. Her pen moved slower than usual, not from fatigue but precision, the kind that came before storms. "Evening, Commander," Hollis called from across the room, lifting his bottle. "Heard you're supervising the breath hold trials tomorrow." She didn't look up. He leaned back, louder now. "Figure if you can outbreathe me, I'll salute you. But if you black out first, maybe it's time you stop pretending to be combat ready." Laughter rippled half-hearted, uncertain. She underlined a line in the file, quiet, focused, detached. At another table, Petty Officer Deacon Reed, quiet, steady, the kind of man who noticed everything, set down his tray. He'd seen the roster. Holly's wasn't supposed to be on it, but now his name had appeared. He approached. "Commander, you sure about this?" She didn't look up. He signed the waiver. "There's a difference between a challenge and a trap." "I didn't bait him," she said. "I opened a pool. He chose to drown." Reed stared. Then he saw the document she slid toward him, the updated endurance trial roster stamped and logged. Holly's, candidate number 3. Supervisor, Isla. Observer, Deacon Reed. He exhaled. "Want me recording?" "I want you watching." "You think he'll try something?" "He's not used to being under control," she said softly. "Especially not someone else." Reed hesitated. "What happens if he makes contact?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The faint sound of her pen clicking was enough. When she finally did speak, her voice was flat. "Then I teach him what a controlled exhale can do to a man who mistakes pressure for power." Later that night, long after the base lights dimmed, she walked the pool deck alone. The water was black glass, reflecting ceiling lights like distant stars. She knelt, fingertips grazing the surface. Cold, still, predictable. She checked the camera logs twice, synced the vital sensors, tested the oxygen alarms, every precaution filed, every variable measured. Then she stood at the edge, eyes tracing her own reflection, calm, unblinking. There were scars beneath her collarbone, faint against the pale light, each one a reminder. Pain doesn't teach you how to breathe. It teaches you when to stop wasting air. Tomorrow, she thought, the lesson begins. And when she turned off the lights, the reflection disappeared, but the control stayed. What happens when silence becomes a weapon? When the calm isn't surrender, but warning? The pool lights hummed low that morning, faint blue pulses sliding across the water's surface like a heartbeat that refused to rush. Everything smelled of chlorine and steel, the kind of clean that only existed in places built for recovery and discipline, not comfort. Lieutenant Commander Isla stood at the edge, stopwatch in hand, the silver glint catching the first breath of dawn. Her hair was pulled tight, no stray strands, no motion wasted. Control, that was her uniform now. The recruits began to gather. Some whispered. Others watched from the benches, pretending not to. Even those who hadn't seen the incident yesterday had heard about it. The story had spread faster than truth, that Holly's had crossed a line, that she hadn't reacted, that maybe she wasn't as human as the rest of them. No one dared to ask her. No one ever did. Holly's arrived late again, boots wet, suit zipped wrong, smile too easy for the setting. "Morning, ma'am," he said, stepping close enough that his reflection blurred against hers in the still water. "Try not to fog the goggles when you pass out." No reaction, only her voice calm and measured, standard submersion drill, no breath assist, no weights, surface taps allowed. Stopwatch starts at full submersion, exit only on signal or failure to maintain. The observers scribbled notes on clipboards. Petty Officer Deacon Reed adjusted his headset behind the control glass, checking the biometric feed. His voice came through the intercom, steady but quiet. Both sensors active, heart rates baseline, comm log synced. Isla didn't answer. She stepped forward, lowered herself into the water with the kind of grace that made even gravity look clumsy. The pool swallowed her reflection, leaving only the ripples. Holly's cannonballed in beside her, laughing as he surfaced. "Didn't peg you for quiet company," he said, still grinning. But she was already underwater. No splash, no hesitation, just silence. Underneath, the world changed. Sound dulled into pulse. Light fractured into ribbons. Breath became currency. Isla closed her eyes, felt the water press against her lungs like memory. This was her domain. The only place that ever made sense, where control wasn't theory, it was survival. Her mind didn't drift to the pool around her. It drifted to Kandahar. Back to the night, the blast took the air out of her body and replaced it with dust. Back to the hum of her own pulse when she realized she couldn't breathe, and the radio still waited for coordinates. Back then, silence wasn't peace, it was defiance. She stayed conscious long enough to transmit, even as her chest collapsed, even as the medic screamed for her to stop talking. She had whispered through blood and dust and pain, "Stay with me. Keep moving. East flank, 40 meters. Go." She didn't remember the pain anymore, just the stillness, the cold acceptance that if she passed out, her team would die. So she didn't. Not then. Not now. Isla's pulse slowed, 74, 69, 63, dropping with intention. Each second another layer of control. She felt her body become something between calm and nothingness, the quiet space where panic had no voice. Beside her, Hollis fidgeted. He wasn't used to quiet. His body twitched for movement, for dominance. He glanced toward her, still, suspended, eyes open, lips pressed, no bubbles escaping. His chest ached already, 30 seconds in. He didn't understand how anyone could look that calm underwater. From the control booth, Reed leaned forward. The biometric readouts streamed across the monitor. KERR-HR, 47 BPM stable. HOLLIS-HR, 104 BPM, SPIKING. He whispered under his breath, "Breathe slower, Corporal. You're not racing her. You're racing yourself." But Hollis wasn't listening. He was watching her, studying her stillness. At 34 seconds, something inside him flinched, ego maybe. Pride definitely. He drifted closer, closer still. She didn't move. Then, with a surge of impulsive confidence, he reached out. One hand locked around her throat. It wasn't tight, not yet, just pressure, just a test, just a man trying to prove a point. Inside the booth, alarms flickered, motion spike, pressure fluctuation. Reed's finger hovered over the comm. "Commander." No response. Underwater, time slowed. Isla didn't thrash, didn't struggle, didn't even blink. Her hand brushed his wrist once, not to pull, not to resist, but to measure. Pressure, angle, grip, tension. Every detail logged by a mind trained to fight with patience, not speed. He squeezed harder, expecting panic, expecting bubbles. None came. Her eyes stayed open, cold, sharp, almost studying him through the wavering light. And then something shifted. Not in her body, but in his. At 40 seconds, his lungs screamed. His body begged for air. But she didn't release him, didn't react at all. She was teaching him something. He just didn't know the lesson yet. Reed's voice came through the speaker. 41 seconds elapsed. Hollis HR 118. Care HR 44. At 43 seconds, the hand on her throat trembled. He hadn't expected resistance to feel like nothing. He'd expected a fight. Instead, he met control. Perfect, terrifying control. At 44, his chest spasmed. Reflex. His mind flashed white. Instinct screamed, surface now. But before he could move, she did. Her left hand rose, slow, deliberate, like a closing gate. It clamped around his wrist, twisted with surgical precision. Her right foot planted against the pool bottom, leverage born from 1,000 hours of combat drills. The torque was silent, but the pop was. Even underwater, Reed could hear it through the vibrations in the glass. He winced. "That's a dislocation," he muttered. The next second, Isla turned, broke contact, surfaced. Hollis came up gasping, coughing, sputtering, his body a storm of confusion. The assistants rushed toward him, shouting orders. But she was already climbing the ladder. Water streamed from her sleeves, her breathing measured. No rasp, no wheeze. Her heartbeat hadn't spiked once. Reed stared through the glass. In 20 years, he'd never seen control like that. It wasn't just physical, it was something else. Something colder. like she'd decided long ago never to let panic have a name inside her. Holly sat slumped against the wall, clutching his arm, face pale. She broke it, he muttered. She snapped it underwater. Isla didn't even look at him. She was standing by the control board, towel draped over one shoulder, pressing a button to stop the timer. He applied a chokehold during a no-contact drill, she said calmly. I responded with joint manipulation, not force. Review the footage. The assistant knelt beside Holly's, murmuring protocol. He didn't hear. His pride was louder than the pain. You used me, he hissed. You wanted this. Isla turned her head slightly. The point was already proven. You just didn't see it coming. Then she walked away. Reed emerged from the control room moments later with a printed log. Vitals recorded everything, he said quietly. You didn't cross the anaerobic threshold. You stayed within parameters the whole time. Holly's blinked. That wasn't training, that was payback. No, Isla said, that was instruction. Reed handed her the log. Heart rate bottomed at 42, he said. You didn't even flinch when he grabbed you. He thought I'd panic, she replied softly. But panic's just air wasted in advance. Reed studied her face. He wanted to ask why she'd let it happen at all, why she hadn't stopped him sooner, but then he saw it in her eyes. She hadn't wanted revenge. She'd wanted truth. And truth only surfaces when the air runs out. Later, she stood in the locker room alone, towel folded with the same precision she used for field gear. Each movement deliberate, exact, unhurried. She pressed her palms against the metal bench and closed her eyes. Her lungs still burned faintly, not from lack of air, from restraint. The body remembered what the mind refused to express. She inhaled slowly, counted 6 beats, exhaled 8, steady, controlled. The image flashed again, Kandahar, the rubble, the pain, the voice of her over radio. Stay with me, Isla, you're not done yet. And she hadn't been, not then, not now. Reed's voice echoed faintly from the hall, talking to the med techs. She didn't even blink, he said. I've never seen anyone that calm underwater. Calm, someone replied. Reed hesitated. No, he said finally, calculated. That night base command called for review. A quiet meeting. No witnesses except Reed, Hollies, Captain Harland, and Isla. The footage played in silence, Bubbles' body's motion. Then the moment, the choke, the twist, the release. At 48 seconds, the screen froze. Harland looked up, voice level. Corporal, is that you initiating contact? She provoked me, Hollies said quickly. She baited me. You saw her, she wanted me to react. Harland's expression didn't change. So, a superior officer maintaining composure is provocation. She knew what she was doing, Hollies barked. And you did. Hollies faltered. His jaw flexed, words lost somewhere between shame and anger. Reed stepped forward. Sir, biometric logs confirm she remained within operational parameters. No panic spike, no distress response. Corporal Hollies initiated contact at 44 seconds. Harland turned to Isla. Why didn't you surface or signal for assistance? She met his eyes without flinching. Because I didn't need to. You were under pressure. I've been under worse. The silence after that felt like oxygen deprivation. Heavy, necessary. Finally, Harland nodded. Corporal Hollies, you're removed from evaluation. Effective immediately. You'll report to administrative duty pending review. Holly stiffened. You can't. I can, Harland cut him off. And I just did. He turned to Isla. You could have filed assault charges. She shook her head. Didn't need to. Why not? Because the air tells the truth, she said softly. And he ran out of it before I did. When the meeting ended, she walked past Hollies without a glance. It wasn't your throat you lost the fight with, she murmured. It was your timing. He didn't answer, couldn't. Later, alone, she stepped outside the annex. The night air hit her lungs like forgiveness, sharp, cold, clean. She looked up at the horizon where the water met the dawn. The stars were fading, the light bleeding into blue. Her breathing slowed. Inhale 6 beats. Exhale 8. She wasn't thinking about Hollies anymore, or the review, or the whisper that would echo through the base tomorrow. She was thinking about control, how it isn't the absence of fear but the mastery of it, how silence could disarm faster than shouting. And as the wind moved across her face, she smiled faintly, not from pride, but from understanding. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. Why did the air feel different the next morning? Maybe because everyone in the gym already knew what had happened, even if no one had said a word. The metal doors swung open and Lieutenant Commander Isla walked in exactly the way she always did, quiet, composed, precise. Nothing about her posture had changed. Clipboard in one hand, stopwatch looped around her finger. Yet every head that lifted in her direction straightened by instinct, like the very oxygen in the room had learned respect overnight. Nobody spoke of the review or the confrontation. They didn't need to. The pool's echo still carried it, a lesson whispered through chlorinated silence. Control wins louder than strength ever will. Recruits adjusted stances without prompting. Straps tightened. Voices dropped. Even the usual clang of weights softened, as if the gym itself had decided to listen. Isla didn't acknowledge it. She moved station to station, marking times, nodding posture, breath, alignment. Her focus remained the same, but beneath the surface of that composure, something had shifted, not pride, not relief, something heavier. Respect always came too late, and it never repaired what it broke on the way. At the far end of the room, Petty Officer Deacon Reed observed from the treadmill racks, arms folded. He reviewed the footage again before dawn, not because command required it, but because something about it unsettled him. He'd watched that 48-second clip frame by frame, how she stayed still, how her pulse dropped instead of spiking, how she seemed to wait for the world to fall apart before she exhaled. He'd seen soldiers act brave. He'd seen them die that way too. But this wasn't bravery. It was discipline made flesh, the kind that only came from surviving what should have killed you. Isla paused beside a young recruit whose hands trembled during a squat hold. She crouched, adjusted his footing, spoke barely above a whisper. Control doesn't mean stillness, she said. It means knowing when to move slow enough that fear can't find you. The recruit nodded, jaw tight, eyes wide. Good, she said softly and stood. Reed watched the way the room seemed to orbit her, not from authority, but from gravity. Every movement she made carried an invisible perimeter, an aura of silent calculation. He'd served long enough to know what it meant. The ones who never shouted were the ones everyone listened to. When drills ended, Isla dismissed the group with a simple nod. No speech, no acknowledgement. The recruits filed out quietly, exchanging glances that tried to hold awe and unease at the same time. Only when the room emptied did Reed step forward. Command signed off on the report, he said. Of course they did. They added a commendation. She looked up from her clipboard. For restraint. He nodded. Her mouth twitched, not a smile, not really. Restraint, she repeated, as if testing the word's weight. They call it discipline when you survive it, but when you're living it, it's just breathing through pain. Reed leaned against the wall. Most people would have fought back. Most people don't know what fighting costs, she said. Sometimes the cleanest strike is the one you never throw. He studied her for a moment, trying to find the right question, the one that wouldn't sound like pity. Finally, he said, "You ever miss it, the field?" She didn't answer right away. The hum of ventilation filled the space between them. "I miss purpose," she said finally. "Not the noise, just the reason for it." He nodded slowly. "Guess that's what survival feels like, quiet where the mission used to be." Her gaze drifted toward the pool beyond the glass, the surface still rippling from earlier drills. "Quiet," she murmured, "isn't peace. It's unfinished work." That night the base cafeteria buzzed in half-whispers. News traveled like oxygen, unseen but everywhere. Hollies had been reassigned to admin duty, typing reports with his dominant hand braced, pride fractured worse than his wrist. A few recruits caught glimpses of him through the corridor window, head bent low over paperwork, eyes hollow. No one mocked him anymore. Pity filled the space where arrogance used to sit. In the same building, Isla reviewed training logs alone. Her handwriting precise, each line a measurement of progress. But her mind wasn't on the numbers. It was on the silence, on how easily fear disguised itself as strength. Every file name she read blurred into something else: memory, Kandahar, the concussion of pressure that had stolen her air once before. She closed her eyes and the room changed. The hiss of the cafeteria fan became the shriek of sand against concrete. The fluorescent hum morphed into the dull ringing of trauma. She was back there, pinned under rubble, ribs grinding against lung tissue. The corpsman's face above her, shouting words she couldn't hear. "Stay still, don't speak, you'll tear it worse." But the team needed coordinates. She had whispered them anyway. 269er by 051, go east, I'll mark the path. Even bleeding, she'd smiled. Because the worst thing a soldier could do wasn't die. It was go silent before the job was done. She opened her eyes now, heart steady. The cafeteria came back into focus. The past folded away like a map she no longer needed but couldn't throw out. Reed entered quietly, 2 mugs of coffee in hand. He set one beside her. "Can't sleep either." "Never could," she said. He sat opposite, studied her face in the low light. "You ever think about leaving, getting out for good?" She considered it. The question sounded simple, but felt heavier than anything the pool had pressed against her chest. "I tried," she admitted. 6 months ago, packed a bag, signed the forms. Then I saw the news, another convoy, another blast. Different names, same dust. You can't walk away from what built you. You just learn to breathe around it." Reed nodded, eyes down. "I get that." They sat in silence a while, not awkward, just real. 2 soldiers orbiting the same kind of loneliness, both pretending they didn't need it. After a while, Isla asked, "How long were you in before you stopped waiting for things to make sense?" He gave a faint laugh, "Still waiting." "Good," she said, "means you're still alive." When he left, she stayed behind, gaze fixed on the reflection in her coffee. It trembled faintly with every breath she took, proof she was still here. Proof that control hadn't turned her into stone. Not yet. The following afternoon brought another set of drills. She ran them with the same precision as always, but now her focus kept slipping. Every recruit she watched, every held breath, every flinch reminded her of something deeper. How easy it was to confuse control with isolation. Midway through the session, a young woman named Maya Chen faltered during a breath-hold lap. She surfaced too soon, gasping, embarrassed. The others looked to Isla for correction. But instead of reprimand, Isla simply said, "You came up because you thought you couldn't last. Next time, count to 4 after you want to breathe. That's where you'll find out who you are." Chen nodded, shoulders squared. "Yes, ma'am." As the recruit swam again, Isla felt something stir, faint, almost forgotten. Not pride. Hope. The kind that came from seeing a reflection of your younger self still willing to try. When training ended, she lingered by the pool long after everyone left. The surface glimmered under the fading daylight. For the first time since the incident, she allowed herself to exhale without counting. The sound echoed soft against the tiles, fragile, human. "Commander," a voice called from behind. It was Dr. Marin carrying a folder. "Your latest test results." She took the envelope, scanned the chart, lung capacity improving, but not by much. "Still pushing it," he said. "Your body's catching up slower than your will." She folded the paper neatly. The body learns from repetition, the will doesn't wait. He smiled faintly. You're going to keep teaching, aren't you? As long as they keep breathing wrong, she said. Marin studied her for a long moment. You know, some people recover to get back to life. Others recover to prove they still deserve it. Which one are you? Isla looked toward the pool again, where the blue LEDs shimmered like calm beneath chaos. Maybe I'm just trying to remember what peace sounded like before it became a skill. Marin nodded slowly. Then I hope one day you stop measuring it. She didn't answer, he left. Later, as the base lights dimmed to night shift mode, she sat on the bleachers overlooking the water. Her reflection stared back, calm, unreadable, but beneath it she could still see the cracks. Each one a memory, each breath a compromise between who she was and who she refused to become. Reed's words from earlier replayed in her mind, quiet where the mission used to be. Maybe he was right. Maybe silence wasn't survival. Maybe it was unfinished duty. She inhaled slowly, counted 6 beats, held for 4, released on 8, the rhythm she'd lived by since Kandahar. The rhythm that had kept her alive. But this time the numbers blurred. Instead of counting, she listened to the faint ripple of water, to the hum of electricity, to her own heartbeat echoing off concrete. For the first time in months, she let herself feel the ache that came with breathing freely. It wasn't weakness. It was memory, proof that she hadn't turned into the silence she'd mastered. Tomorrow there would be another roster, another drill, another set of names who'd never know what control really cost. But tonight she let the stillness stay. No stopwatch, no checklist, just the sound of lungs learning how to trust air again. And somewhere beyond the annex, Holly sat alone in his office, typing with one hand, each keystroke a dull reminder that sometimes humiliation isn't punishment, it's lesson. He would never admit it out loud, but part of him replayed that 48-second silence every night, wondering how long he would have lasted, wondering how someone could face pressure like that and not fight, just wait. He didn't understand it yet, but one day he might. Because every soldier eventually learns. Control isn't born in confidence. It's born in the moment you should have drowned and didn't. As dawn began to bloom pale across the horizon, light spilled through the annex windows, tracing thin lines across the pool. Isla stood, straightened her shoulders, and whispered to no one in particular. Sometimes the breath you hold the longest is the one that lets you finally let go. Her reflection disappeared in the ripples, but her calm remained unbroken, unwavering, alive. Why did he come back now? The thought crossed her mind before the door even opened. The sound of boots in the corridor wasn't unfamiliar, steady, weighted, but there was something about that rhythm that made the air around her tense before she could stop it. She didn't need to look to know it wasn't one of her recruits. The step was older, heavier, and far too sure of itself to belong to someone still learning. Lieutenant Commander Isla Care was seated in the observation gallery, reviewing dive logs when the shadow filled her doorway. "Permission to enter," came the voice, low, gravel-coated, carved by too many years of orders and sand. She didn't look up right away. She didn't have to. "Captain Rowan," she said, "you never needed permission." He stepped inside anyway. Same old posture, shoulders back, jaw locked, that slight limp from an explosion in Fallujah 15 years ago. He'd been her commanding officer once, long before the blast that tore half the air from her lungs. The man who had sent her into Kandahar, who had pulled her name off the casualty list with disbelief in his eyes. He hadn't changed much, but time had carved something softer in the corners of his expression. Regret, maybe, or recognition. "Base operations told me you were cleared for instruction," he said, pulling off his cap. "Didn't tell me you were making headlines again." She turned a page, eyes calm. "Headlines are for people who want to be seen." Rowan gave a quiet huff. "And here I thought you enjoyed proving people wrong." "I used to," she admitted. "Now I just prefer proving I'm still breathing." He smiled faintly at that. The silence between them wasn't hostile, it was history catching its breath. Finally, he said, I saw the footage. She froze halfway through a note. They sent it that far up. They didn't have to. Command circulated it for training analysis. He stepped closer. Half the base calls it the chokehold incident. The other half calls it a lesson. Her jaw tightened. It wasn't meant to be either. Then what was it? She looked up finally, eyes like still water. A reminder that silence can protect as much as it punishes. Rowan studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. You always were the quiet kind of dangerous. I'm retired dangerous, she corrected softly. There's a difference. He paced to the window overlooking the pool, the same one where the water still rippled faintly from morning drills. You know why I came, Isla. They're forming a new recovery unit in the Pacific Cross Branch Mixed Service. They want you to train the recruits in controlled endurance. I already train recruits. These aren't recruits. They're field operatives coming off trauma rotations. They'll need someone who understands pressure, not just protocol. She didn't answer. The hum of the filtration vents filled the silence. Rowan turned, leaning against the window frame. I read Marin's reports. You're holding steady at 78% lung capacity. That's higher than anyone expected. You could be operational again. Her pen stilled on the page. Operational, she repeated. That's just another word for disposable. You think that's what this is? He asked quietly. A chance to throw you back into the deep end. She met his gaze. Isn't it always? He exhaled, rubbing a scar near his temple. You know what I remember about Kandahar, the sound. You on the comms, breathing like a metronome while giving us grid coordinates through a collapsed chest. Every medic thought you'd die before extraction. But you didn't. You stayed awake until every one of us was out. You know why that stuck with me? She said nothing. Because I realized control isn't a talent, it's a choice, and not many make it. Her hands tightened around the clipboard. She could feel the edges pressing into her palms, grounding her in the present. The compliment didn't feel like pride, it felt like weight. Old ghosts wearing new names. Finally, she said, if I agree, what happens when one of them breaks? What happens when they see me freeze in the water and call it calm? Then they'll learn what calm really costs. He stepped closer. The program starts in 2 weeks. You don't owe them anything, but you might owe yourself the chance to stop hiding from the thing you survived. She turned back to the glass. The reflection staring back at her wasn't the same woman he'd commanded years ago. This one had learned how to breathe through grief, through humiliation, through the sound of her own heartbeat echoing inside a hospital mask. But maybe he was right. Maybe hiding wasn't healing. I'll think about it, she said finally. Rowan nodded, setting a file on the table. I'll leave the details, you'll know what to do. When he left, the door clicked shut softly, like even the metal understood not to disturb her thoughts. She sat there for a long time. The pool below shimmered in shades of blue and silver. Her reflection wavered, half shadow, half survivor. Reed's words from days before echoed faintly, quiet where the mission used to be. Maybe this was the mission returning. That night she walked the compound perimeter. The ocean wind carried salt and memory, the kind of cold that cut through fatigue but reminded you were still alive. Floodlights turned the asphalt into a patchwork of pale gold. She stopped near the flagpole, the fabric whipping against metal with sharp rhythm. She used to love that sound. It meant order, discipline. But now it only reminded her of things she couldn't control, the wind, the scars, the nights that never ended clean. Her lungs tightened slightly in the chill. She paused, inhaled slow through her nose. 6 in, hold 4, out 8. The rhythm steadied, always steady. In the distance, the sea whispered against the docks, a different kind of breathing, the kind that didn't count seconds. Behind her, footsteps approached. Reed again. He was good at finding her when silence grew too thick. You planning to say yes? He asked. She didn't turn. You heard. Rowan's not exactly subtle. Word spreads. He wants me to train operatives, trauma rotation. Reed gave a small nod. You'd be good at it. Would I? She asked softly. I teach people how to hold their breath, not how to live with it. He moved beside her, hands in his pockets. You teach control, that's rarer. She studied the horizon. The water glimmered like glass, endless and unforgiving. Control didn't save my team in Kandahar. No, he said quietly, but it saved you long enough to bring them home. There's a difference. She looked at him then, for the first time seeing the faint exhaustion behind his steady expression. He wasn't trying to comfort her. He was trying to remind her she was still part of something that mattered. Tell me something, Deacon, she said. You ever wonder what happens when control becomes a cage? When you stop knowing if you're calm or just numb? He hesitated. Every day, he admitted. That answer, simple, honest, hit deeper than anything else had in weeks. She looked down at her hands. Maybe I'll say yes, but not for them. For who then? For the ones still holding their breath. He smiled faintly. That's reason enough. The next morning she sent her acceptance through secure comms. The message was short, reporting for reassignment, pending clearance, commander care. When she hit send, she didn't feel relief, just movement. Later that day, as the sun bled through the annex skylights, she supervised another endurance rotation. The recruits lined the pool edge, uncertain, eyes flicking between her and the water. She studied them, so young, so sure their fear was temporary. You'll want to panic, she said. That's natural, but panic is noise. Noise is oxygen leaving before it's needed. Learn to listen before you breathe. Maya Chen nodded, face pale but determined. Isla gave a slight nod back. Good, begin. As they submerged, the surface rippled once, then smoothed out. Silence followed. She counted in her head, 5 seconds, 10, 20. The stopwatch ticked steady in her palm. When they surfaced, gasping, she said, You didn't fail. You learned your first truth. Control isn't the absence of fear, it's the ability to delay it. Reed stood near the door watching her. He caught her eye as the recruits climbed out, dripping and exhausted. You sound like a poet, he murmured. Maybe I just learned to make silence rhyme, she said, walking past him. He chuckled softly. Careful, they'll start calling you legend. Let them, she replied. Legends still breathe. That evening, alone in her quarters, Isla packed what little she owned. Uniforms folded with geometric precision, stopwatch wrapped in cloth, the medical armband tucked away at the bottom of the duffel. She paused at the mirror. For a long moment she stared at her reflection, the faint scars on her collarbone, the line at her jaw where the mask once left bruises, the eyes that no longer blinked at memory. Control had kept her alive, but maybe, for once, it could help her live. Outside, waves crashed softly against the docks. She closed the zipper, exhaled once through her nose, and whispered to the quiet. Let's see what the world sounds like without counting. The lights flicked off behind her, the door clicked shut. For the first time since Kandahar, Isla Care wasn't waiting for permission to breathe. How do you teach calm to people who have forgotten how to feel it? The question echoed in Isla Care's head as the cargo transport rattled through low Pacific clouds. She'd been airborne for hours, seat bolted against bulkhead, headset half-cracked from years of use. The air smelled like hydraulic oil and salt. Outside, the ocean stretched in every direction, an unending field of gray that looked like someone had erased the horizon. Her duffel sat between her boots, straps wrapped twice for order. The stopwatch was inside, ticking even when it wasn't pressed. Habit had a pulse of its own. Across from her sat a group of fresh arrivals, some Navy, some Air Force, one Marine medic with eyes too hollow for his age. All were silent. They'd come from different wars, different kinds of collapse. Each wore the same expression, the look of people who had seen too much and were now being asked to recover in front of strangers. The pilot's voice cracked over the intercom. Approaching Henderson Atoll, ETA 6 minutes. Henderson wasn't on maps the public saw. Officially, it was a joint rehabilitation center. Unofficially, it was where command sent the soldiers they didn't know how to fix. The runway appeared through mist, a narrow strip carved into coral, fringed by waves that looked close enough to swallow the landing gear. The plane touched down hard, brakes screaming. When the door opened, the humidity hit like a physical thing. The scent of salt water and antiseptic mixed into the air, the smell of new beginnings that didn't quite trust themselves. A transport jeep waited. Reed stepped out of it, uniform damp, grin faint but real. "Welcome to paradise," he said. She raised an eyebrow. Paradise doesn't usually come with isolation fencing. "Depends what you're isolating from," he replied. "Command wanted familiar faces on your team. Guess I count." He drove her through the compound, rows of low white buildings, solar panels glinting, a training field cut straight into sand. The sea shimmered beyond it, close enough to hear. Everything hummed with quiet purpose. Mechanics repairing dive gear, medics running oxygen checks, officers carrying clipboards identical to hers. But the eyes told the truth. Nobody here was healed. They were all trying to pretend. Inside the central facility, Captain Rowan waited beside a large observation tank. The water was clear, deep enough for submersion drills. He greeted her with a nod. "Welcome to Henderson. You'll like it here. Nobody asks what's wrong, they just measure how long it lasts." She glanced at the tank. "How long they last, you mean?" He shrugged. "Semantics." Then motioning to the recruits gathering nearby, he said, "This is Unit 9. You'll run them through Phase 1 endurance, breath hold, blackout prevention, controlled panic response. You know the drill." "Who's the medic?" she asked. "Sergeant Ava Morales," he said. "Combat diver, Philippines Ops. Lost her partner in a cave collapse last year. Refuses to get back in the water." Isla's eyes softened. "Then she shouldn't be here." "That's why she is," Rowan replied. The first session started at dusk. The Pacific sun stretched red across the horizon, turning the pool's surface into liquid copper. Isla stood by the edge, stopwatch glinting. The recruits lined up, uncertain, tense. "You're not here to prove you can hold your breath," she said. "You're here to prove you can hold yourself. When panic starts, you'll want to surface. Don't. Not yet. Stay until the silence stops feeling like punishment." Some nodded, others stared. Morales looked away. The first drill began. One by one, they submerged. The pool went quiet except for the rhythm of heart monitors. Isla's eyes moved from each figure to the digital readout, 40 seconds, 50, 60. She called out, "Surface." And they did, gasping, coughing, alive. "Again," she said, "you don't conquer fear in one breath." They repeated until exhaustion blurred technique. The sun slipped away, floodlights replaced it. Morales still hadn't entered the water. She stood at the edge, arms crossed, eyes locked on the reflection trembling beneath her boots. "Sergeant," Isla called gently, "your turn." Morales hesitated. "Permission to skip, ma'am." "Denied." "I don't." "I know," Isla interrupted softly. "That's why you're doing it." For a long moment Morales didn't move. Then she exhaled sharply and knelt. The water lapped against her wrists, hesitant, unforgiving. She dipped her head once, then froze. Her body shook, not from cold but memory. Isla stepped closer, voice low. "What do you hear?" Morales blinked. "Everything." "Focus on one sound," Isla said. "Your heartbeat, make it slower." The younger woman closed her eyes, inhaled once, and lowered herself beneath the surface. The pool swallowed her whole. For a few seconds the readout on the monitor jumped erratically, heart rate spiking. Then it began to fall. Isla watched the numbers drop. 118, 104.88. At 40 seconds Morales surfaced, gasping, trembling, but not crying. "Good," Isla said quietly. "That's the first breath that belongs to you again." Something in Morales's eyes shifted, not relief, not victory, but understanding. She nodded once, water dripping from her lashes. As the group dispersed, Reed approached from the observation deck. "You ever get tired of being right?" "Every day," she said. He smirked. "They're responding to you." "They're responding to themselves," she corrected. "I just remind them what silence sounds like when it's safe." Later that night, she sat outside the barracks, a mug of black coffee cooling beside her. The sea whispered somewhere beyond the fence line. She could hear faint laughter from the mess hall, uneasy, but real. It reminded her of her first mission debrief after Kandahar, when laughter sounded like rebellion against guilt. She took a sip, eyes on the horizon. The stars had come out sharp, countless, infinite. They looked like breathing spaces punctuating a dark sky. Reed joined her, sitting on the low wall. "How's it feel?" "To what?" "To teach people how to breathe when you barely can." She chuckled softly. "I'm improving, 78% capacity and counting." He looked at her sideways. "You ever think maybe that's not the number that matters?" She raised an eyebrow. "I mean the percentage of yourself you've allowed to come back." She didn't answer. The silence between them felt thicker than the night. After a while, she said quietly, "You ever notice how nobody talks about recovery's boredom? The part between hurting and healing where nothing feels honest." He nodded. "That's the part most quit on." "Maybe that's why I stayed," she murmured, "because I never trusted peace to last." They sat there until the generator lights dimmed, until the night wrapped around them like salt air and exhaustion. In the following days, the drills grew harder, weighted descents, underwater blackout simulations, paired endurance dives. Isla led them all, rarely raising her voice. Her control became the metronome they followed. And slowly something changed. The fear in the recruits' eyes began to fade, not disappear, just transform, into respect, into resilience. On the fifth day, Morales approached Isla after training. "Commander," she said, hesitant, "I went down 2 minutes today, first time since the accident." Isla smiled faintly, "And it didn't hurt." "Good," Isla said. "That's not because it got easier, it's because you stopped fighting it." Morales nodded. Then quieter, "How do you do it? How do you stay so calm?" Isla looked out over the water. "I'm not calm, I'm practiced." The young woman frowned. "What's the difference?" "Practice forgives failure," Isla said softly. "Calm just hides it." That night a storm rolled over the atoll. Rain hammered the roofs, wind howled through corridors. Power flickered, plunging the compound into intervals of darkness. The recruits huddled inside, but Isla found herself drawn to the water again. The pool overflowed in sheets of silver rain. She stood at its edge, soaked, watching the surface churn. Reed found her there, voice nearly lost under the storm. "You can't keep standing in the rain like it owes you answers." She glanced at him. "Maybe it does. The water took half my air once. Feels fair I take some of its quiet now." He stepped closer. "Rowan said the new rotation starts next week. Civilians this time, aid workers from collapsed zones, not soldiers. You sure you're ready for that?" "I'm not sure about anything anymore," she admitted. "But uncertainty's just another kind of pressure. I can hold it." Lightning flashed across the sea, illuminating her face, rain streaking down like the ghost of tears she'd never let fall. Reed studied her. "You ever think maybe you deserve rest?" She smiled, faint and distant. "Rest is earned when someone else takes your place. Until then, you hold your breath and wait." The thunder swallowed the rest of their words. By dawn, the storm had passed. The compound smelled of wet salt and ozone. The recruits gathered quietly at breakfast, speaking in low voices. Morales sat among them, calmer now, even laughing once. Isla watched from across the hall, coffee in hand, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to feel something dangerously close to peace. Rowan joined her, tray balanced on one hand. They're different already, he said. You did that. She shook her head. They did, I just kept count. He studied her profile, the scar that ran faintly along her collarbone. You ever going back? To the field. To living, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Maybe I already am. Outside, sunlight broke through scattered clouds, catching on the still wet pavement. The air smelled new again. Later that afternoon, she returned to the pool, alone this time. She sat at the edge, dipping her fingers into the water. It was cool, clear, waiting. She took one long, deliberate breath and whispered, "This time, it's not for survival." Then she slipped beneath the surface, eyes open, lungs steady, the world above dissolving into shimmering silence. Seconds passed, then minutes. She didn't count them, she didn't need to. When she surfaced at last, the air tasted clean. And for the first time since Kandahar, Isla wasn't holding her breath to outlast the world. She was holding it to remember what living felt like when she finally let go. Why do we only learn control after we've already lost it once? The question hung in the air as Isla watched the new transport arrive at Henderson. Different faces this time, not soldiers but civilians, aid workers, journalists, disaster relief specialists. People who'd faced chaos without uniforms to protect them. Some looked exhausted, others hollow, all of them carrying the same invisible weight, the kind that doesn't bleed but still hurts to breathe around. She scanned their files that morning, one by one. Tsunami rescue, collapsed buildings, fire zones. None of them trained for combat, yet every one of them had seen war in a different disguise. Captain Rowan had been right. This rotation wasn't about strength. It was about rebuilding trust in the body after the mind had broken it. Reed stood beside her near the hangar doors, arms folded. They look worse than our last unit, he said quietly. They look human, Isla replied. That's worse for training, better for healing. He nodded, understanding what she didn't say. Soldiers know how to follow orders. Civilians don't, they follow fear. By noon, the group gathered around the main pool. Isla stood in front of them, clipboard pressed against her hip, stopwatch gleaming in the sunlight. You're here because your bodies remember panic better than peace, she began. We can't erase that. We can only retrain it. Her tone was calm, but the words landed heavy. This isn't therapy, it's control. Water won't forgive your fear, it will show you where it lives. The recruits, if they could still be called that, shifted uneasily. Among them stood a young man named Ethan Vale, 28, relief diver from Manila. His file said he'd pulled 3 survivors from a collapsed ferry hull before being trapped underwater for 7 minutes. The 4th person he tried to save hadn't made it. He was the one Isla watched the closest. The first exercise was simple, 30-second submersion drills, eyes open, no motion, just stillness. She explained the rules, demonstrated control. Then they began. The water accepted them quietly, each surface ripple a small act of trust. Reed monitored the vitals from the console. Heart rate steady, he reported. Minor spike from Vale. Isla's eyes flicked toward the young man. He was trembling, not visibly, just in the micro movements of the shoulders, the shallow shifts of breath. Panic didn't always scream. Sometimes it whispered from muscle memory. Stay with it, she said evenly. You're not drowning, you're remembering. At 20 seconds he surfaced, gasping, coughing water from his nose. He ripped off the goggles, eyes wild. Sorry, I couldn't. She knelt beside him, voice soft. You could, but your body didn't believe you yet. He looked up, shaking his head. It's not the water, it's the silence. That sentence hit her harder than she expected. She knew that kind of silence, the kind that reminded you of everything you couldn't save. Then we'll teach it a new sound, she said, and stood. Again. By the 3rd repetition, he lasted 45 seconds. It wasn't victory, but it was progress. She didn't praise him, she marked it down. silent approval between survivors. After training, Isla stood near the pool's edge, watching reflections distort on the water. Reed joined her, leaning on the railing. "You see yourself in him," he said quietly. "Maybe," she admitted. "Difference is I had orders, he only had hope." "Hope's heavier," Reed murmured. They stood in silence a while, the sound of the filtration system filling the space between them. "Tomorrow," she said, "we take them deeper." The next day's drill wasn't about breath, it was about surrender. Weighted vests, controlled descents, surface divers on standby. Every safety measure double-checked, because one mistake could turn lesson into tragedy. She briefed them calmly. "You'll descend to 12 feet, hold for 30 seconds, then ascend slow. You'll want to rush up. Don't. Panic burns oxygen faster than fear." Morale's supervised equipment checks. Reed monitored sensors from the control booth. Everything felt controlled, predictable until it was. Halfway through the second cycle, alarms chirped faint at first, then urgent. "Commander," Reed called over comms, "Vale's vitals dropping fast. He's not surfacing." Isla was already moving before he finished the sentence. She dove cleanly, cutting through the water in one precise motion. The shock of cold hit her lungs, but she didn't hesitate. Beneath the surface, visibility blurred blue-silver motion. Then she saw him. Ethan Vale, motionless at the bottom, eyes open, bubbles escaping from his mouth. His vest strap tangled in a weight line. He wasn't fighting. He'd given up. Isla reached him, fingers unhooking the strap, pulling hard. The line snapped free. She grabbed his harness and kicked upward. Her chest burned, her ribs screamed, but she didn't surface yet. She looked at his face, pale, empty, peaceful in a way that terrified her. For a split second, she wasn't in Henderson anymore. She was back in Kandahar. The rubble pressing against her chest. The medic yelling she wouldn't make it. Her teammate unconscious beside her. Air gone, hope gone. And still, she hadn't stopped breathing. Not then, not now. Her hand pressed against his sternum underwater. "Come on," she whispered through her mind. "You don't get to stop here." She kicked again, breaking the surface in a surge of light and noise. "Out of the way," she shouted. Her voice cut through the chaos. Reed and Morales rushed to assist as she hauled him onto the deck. She began compressions, once, twice, breath. His chest rose, then fell again, unmoving. A thin ring of recruits stood frozen, their fear holding them still. "Move back," she ordered. Her voice was sharp, commanding, the kind that didn't allow disbelief. Reed handed her the portable Rescues unit. She placed the mask over his face and began the rhythm, steady, relentless. "Come on, Vale, breathe." "Nothing." Again. "Breathe." Still nothing. Rain began to fall, a Pacific drizzle that came from nowhere, turning the light to silver. She leaned closer, whispering through gritted teeth, "I've run out of graves to fill with silence. Don't you dare add yours." Then a cough. A single sharp gasp. Then another. His eyes fluttered open, confusion and panic mixing into one. "Easy," she said, lowering the mask. "You're okay, you're safe." The recruits exhaled, as one collective breath they hadn't realized they were holding. Reed crouched beside her, vitals stabilizing. "He's back." Isla nodded, voice steady. "Keep him under observation." As medics carried him away, the adrenaline faded, leaving her hands trembling not from exertion, but from something she hadn't felt in years. Loss nearly repeating itself. Reed saw it too. "You all right?" She looked down at the water, raindrops rippling across its surface. "You ever wonder how many times you can cheat the same death before it stops being mercy?" He didn't answer. There wasn't one. That night she sat alone in the equipment bay, soaked uniform clinging to her skin, the metallic scent of the pool still in her lungs. She replayed the moment in her head again and again. The way his hand had gone still underwater, the way her chest had tightened, not from breath, but from memory. Dr. Marin had warned her about stress-triggered constriction. She ignored it. Now she felt it, faint, sharp pressure beneath the ribs, a reminder that even control has limits. Reed appeared in the doorway, a towel in hand. "You saved him," he said softly. "He almost died in my care," she replied. "He didn't. Not this time." He stepped closer. "You can't carry everyone who runs out of air, Isla." She looked up, eyes dark. "Maybe not, but I can hold mine long enough to pull them back." He studied her, saw the tremor she tried to hide. "That's not strength, that's penance." She didn't deny it. He left her then, because he knew she didn't want comfort, only quiet. Hours later, the rain stopped. The compound lay still except for the hum of generators and distant surf. Isla returned to the pool. The water reflected the moon, calm again, deceptive in its peace. She knelt at the edge, fingertips brushing the surface. It was colder than before, or maybe she was. She whispered to the reflection, "You're still chasing ghosts, aren't you?" Her voice cracked just once, barely audible. The sound of something breaking, but too softly for anyone else to hear. She sat there until dawn, watching the horizon bleed into light. When the first rays touched the water, she stood, shoulders squared, the tremor gone from her hands. She knew the lesson she'd teach tomorrow wouldn't be about breath or fear. It would be about failure and how sometimes surviving it is the hardest mission of all. The next day she addressed the group. Her voice was calm, deliberate, but her eyes carried something new, a hint of fragility that made every word heavier. "Yesterday, one of you stopped breathing. That happens. Panic doesn't care how strong you are. But we don't measure strength by how long we last underwater. We measure it by how willing we are to come back up." Ethan Vale stood at the end of the line, wrist bandaged, eyes steady. He nodded once. Isla continued, softer now. "Control isn't about holding your breath. It's about knowing when to take the next one." Reed watched from the sidelines. He knew that wasn't just for them. It was for her too. When training ended, Isla lingered by the pool again, the same way she always did, not out of obsession, but gratitude. She touched the stopwatch in her pocket. It was still ticking. And for the first time, she didn't reset it. Because some lessons didn't need repeating. Sometimes breathing again was enough. What happens when control itself is put on trial? The question rose in Isla Care's mind as she stood at the edge of the parade field, early morning light still pale over the Pacific. Henderson was too quiet that day, no laughter from the mess hall, no drills from the pool. The silence wasn't calm, it was waiting. She'd been informed of the inspection only hours earlier. Command wanted a review of her methods, psychological resilience training, the report said, but she knew what it really meant. Someone had seen the footage from the near-drowning incident. Someone somewhere had decided she'd gone too far. The jeep that carried the inspectors arrived just after sunrise. Dust followed it, curling through the air like breath held too long. Two officers stepped out, both Navy, both polished in the way only desk warriors could be. One was Commander Ellis, reputation for protocol so rigid it snapped under human weight. The other was Dr. Havers, a civilian psychologist contracted for trauma assessment. Clipboard, neutral expression, the kind of man who studied pain but never felt it. "Commander Care," Ellis greeted curtly, "you know why we're here." "Because someone almost drowned," she said flatly. "Because someone did," Havers corrected softly, "until you revived him." Isla's jaw tightened. Then maybe the report should start with "until." Ellis ignored that. "We'll be reviewing your training philosophy, control procedures, and medical oversight. Your methods appear unconventional." "Unconventional keeps people alive," she said. "That remains to be seen." He gestured toward the main facility. "Shall we?" Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The recruits, both soldiers and civilians, sat along the benches, silent but alert. Reed stood off to the side, jaw clenched. Morales hovered near the medic station. Ethan Vale, pale but composed, leaned on the railing, eyes locked on Isla. Ellis began with formalities, protocols, incident reports, timelines. His tone was precise, cold, efficient. Havers interjected occasionally, asking questions that cut in quieter ways. How did you determine Mr. Vale's tolerance for re-immersion? How do you quantify emotional safety? What is your personal relationship with failure? That last question landed harder than any reprimand could. She answered each with control. Her voice didn't waver. Her pulse didn't spike. But inside she felt the old pressure, the kind that once pressed her beneath rubble in Kandahar. She could almost hear the medic again. Don't move, just breathe. Except back then, she'd been trapped by war. Now she was trapped by bureaucracy. Reed stepped forward once, tone edged with frustration. With respect, command, her methods are why any of these people can even get near water again. Ellis turned to him. You are not the one under review, Lieutenant. No, Reed said, but I'm the one who saw her save a life while half this base still flinched at the alarm. The tension crackled. Isla raised a hand, silencing him gently. It's fine, she said. Let them finish drowning me with paperwork. A faint murmur of restrained laughter rippled through the recruits. Ellis didn't appreciate it. You think this is amusing? I think it's predictable, she said. People fear what they don't understand, especially when it doesn't fit into a checklist. Havers studied her with quiet interest. Commander, are you suggesting regulation hinders recovery? I'm suggesting recovery isn't measurable. You can count seconds underwater, but not what it took to stay there. He scribbled a note. That's poetic but unscientific. Maybe, she said, eyes steady, but it's true. The room went still. Ellis cleared his throat. Let's proceed to the field demonstration. We'll see if your poetry keeps anyone conscious. Outside, the sky had deepened into a steel blue. The recruits lined the pool deck again, heart monitors clipped, vests secured. Isla stood before them, every movement deliberate. She felt their faith in her like static in the air. For some of them, this was more than a test. It was proof that what they'd learned under her mattered. Phase 1, Ellis instructed, clipboard ready. Proceed. She nodded once. You heard him, she told the group. Standard endurance cycle. You know your limits, respect them. The whistle blew. Bodies slipped into the water. The surface broke into ripples and silver reflections. Monitors beeped, seconds passed. Isla paced slowly along the edge, stopwatch ticking in her hand. Reed watched from the booth, eyes on the vitals. 60 seconds, he called. Surface, Isla ordered. They did, controlled, precise, calm. Ellis noted something on his clipboard. Acceptable. Phase 2, she said, weighted descent. Vale volunteered first. His hand shook slightly as he adjusted the belt, but his eyes didn't waver. Isla met his gaze. You ready? He nodded, if you are. She smiled faintly, always. He descended smoothly, feet disappearing beneath the blue. The seconds ticked. 30, 40, 50. Then his signal flashed, surface request. He rose, slow and steady. When he broke through, his breathing was even. Ellis frowned. You make this look rehearsed. It is, she said. Practice is repetition with meaning. Then quietly, Vale spoke up. Sir, if I may, I nearly died before I came here. I thought silence was where people disappeared. She taught me it's where you find yourself again. I'm not her soldier, but I'd follow her orders over anyone's checklist. The words silenced even Ellis. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Havers said softly, that's data worth keeping. Ellis shifted, uncomfortable. Fine, he muttered. Continue. They completed 3 more drills without incident. Every motion was flawless. Isla's methods, once considered harsh, were working. Then came the final phase, paired immersion under blindfold, trust exercise. She hadn't planned to demonstrate herself. But when one of the recruits froze at the edge, trembling, she stepped forward. "I'll go with him." Reed's voice cut through the comms. "Isla. It's fine." She tied the blindfold, adjusted her breathing, and took the recruit's hand. "Listen," she murmured. "I'll guide you through silence, just match me. You'll know when to surface." Together they descended. The water was cold, immediate. Darkness pressed in. Her senses sharpened, the pull of gravity, the echo of heartbeats. She counted in her head, 5 in, hold 4, out 8. At 20 seconds, she felt the recruit's grip tighten. Panic. She squeezed back once, a reminder still here. The hand steadied. She smiled under the water. But then something unexpected, pressure in her chest, sharp. She ignored it, focused on rhythm. It came again, worse. Pain shot through her ribs like a warning. Not now, she told herself, not in front of them. Her lungs screamed. She fought it 5 more seconds, 4, 3. Finally, she guided the recruit upward, blindfold still on, trusting the surface light. They broke through together. Gasps, applause, relief. But Isla staggered slightly as she climbed out, gripping the rail. The world swayed for a second. Reed was there instantly, voice low. "Breathe slow, you pushed too far." "I'm fine," she said, though her chest burned. Ellis noticed the stumble. "Commander Care, are you physically fit to continue this assignment?" Reed's jaw clenched. She just... "Lieutenant," Ellis snapped, "I asked her." She straightened, meeting his gaze. "Fitness isn't the question, sir. Commitment is." He looked unimpressed. "You may think you're proving something, but reckless devotion doesn't equal discipline." She stepped closer. "Discipline is surviving when devotion isn't enough." That silenced him. Even Havers paused mid-note. The rain started again, light, almost invisible. It pattered against the water, against her uniform, against the silence stretching between them. Then Havers spoke, voice quieter than before. "Commander Care, you understand that what you're teaching them, this control, most people don't come back from it unchanged." She looked at him, eyes calm. "That's the point." He studied her. "You're not training soldiers, you're rebuilding people." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe they'll learn what I never did, how to breathe without guilt." When the inspection ended, Ellis left without another word. Havers lingered long enough to offer a handshake. "For what it's worth," he said, "your silence speaks louder than any briefing I've read." She nodded. "That's because silence doesn't need translation." After they drove off, the compound exhaled, collective relief filling the humid air. The recruits surrounded her, some clapping softly, some just watching with quiet pride. Reed approached, half smiling. "You realize you just told command to their face that peace isn't their department." "Someone had to," she said. He handed her a towel. "They'll either promote you or shut you down." "Either way," she murmured, drying her hands, "I'll still be breathing." That night the compound lights dimmed early. The air was thick with the smell of salt and electricity. Isla walked to the docks, the ocean stretching endlessly ahead. She sat at the edge, feet hanging over water dark as glass. Reed found her there, as he always did. "You know," he said softly, "Ellis won't forget today." "Neither will I." "Worried?" She shook her head. "No, just tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of being the lesson." He sat beside her. The sea murmured under their boots. "You think they'll ever understand what you're trying to teach?" he asked. "Maybe not," she said, "but the ones who needed to already do." They watched the horizon fade into night. The sound of waves was steady, rhythmic, like breathing. After a long silence, she said quietly, "You ever wonder what happens to people who hold their breath too long?" Reed glanced at her. "They surface, eventually." She smiled faintly. If they remember which way is up. He chuckled. You always do. Not always, she whispered, then softer, but I'm learning. The tide rose, brushing against the dock pillars, as if the ocean itself was listening. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled, a reminder that peace is only ever borrowed, never earned. How far can someone go before the silence inside them finally breaks? The storm rolled in just after midnight. No warning, no forecast. One moment, Henderson's horizon was calm. The next, the sea was heaving like a thing alive, black waves crashing over the outer fences. The alarms came late, swallowed by the roar of wind. The compound lost power within minutes. Floodlights flickered, then vanished, leaving only emergency strobes painting the base in red flashes. Isla stood at the operations bay, half-drenched, boots sliding on slick concrete. The rain hit sideways, sharp as grit. Reed shouted something over the noise, pointing toward the docks. Supply boats gone loose, crew still on board. She didn't hesitate. How many? 4, radios dead. Without thinking, she grabbed her dive rig, slung it over her shoulder, and headed for the door. Reed caught her arm. The swells are 10 meters. Nobody can stay under in that. Her voice was steady. You forget who you're talking to. He stared at her, rain running down his face. You're not cleared for this, Isla. I was never cleared for Kandahar either, she said, pulling free. You coming or not? He didn't answer, he just followed. The docks were chaos. The supply boat had broken its moorings, crashing again and again against the pier. A rope line snapped, whipping through the air with a sound like a gunshot. 2 sailors were clinging to the railing, another shouting for help from the deck as the vessel tilted under the surge. Power gone, Morales yelled from the control tower. We can't stabilize it remotely. Then we do it manually, Isla called back. She stripped off her jacket, adjusted the mask, checked the oxygen valve with practiced precision. Her heart rate was already spiking, but she didn't fight it. Panic was a tool if you knew how to hold it still. Reed was beside her, pulling on a harness. If we lose visibility. Then listen for me, she said. Count the seconds. If I don't surface by 1:20, you pull me whether I'm ready or not. He nodded once, no argument left in him. Don't make me use that clock. Wouldn't dream of it. They jumped together. The cold hit like a fist. It wasn't the kind of water you entered. It was the kind that took you. Waves hurled them against the current, dragging, twisting. Her chest compressed under the sudden pressure, but she forced her breathing steady. 6 in, hold 4, out 8. The world narrowed to darkness, rain and noise. She spotted the boat's shadow ahead, tilted, nearly capsized. The crew's flashlight beams cut brief streaks through the water. One man was trapped near the ladder, his leg caught in a tangle of cable. Isla signaled Reed, then dove down hard. The pressure built instantly, ears popping, chest burning. The man was thrashing, water up to his chin. She reached him, slicing the cable with her dive knife, motioning for him to kick upward. He didn't move, panic frozen. She pulled him up, arm locked under his. Together they broke the surface, gasp, scream, air. Reed caught the rope and hauled them toward the pier, Morales helping drag him out. That's 1, Reed shouted. But there were still 3. Starboard side, Morales called from above, 2 more trapped in the cabin. Isla turned, saw the faint flicker of a flashlight through the tilted window. The hull was half underwater. Every instinct screamed to stop. She didn't. Reed, secure the rope. I'm going in. He swore, you won't make it. Then count anyway. She dove again. The cabin was a nightmare, chairs and crates floating, electrical wires hissing where water met metal. She pushed through debris, eyes burning in the salt. 2 shapes huddled near the upper bulkhead, trapped behind a jammed hatch. She kicked hard, gripped the handle. It wouldn't budge. Her lungs started to ache. 40 seconds. She jammed the knife into the seam, twisted, kicked again. The latch gave way. The door blew open, water rushing in, throwing her backward. She grabbed the closer man by his jacket, shoving him toward the opening. He hesitated, terror. She slammed her fist against his chest. Move. Finally he did. The other followed. She pushed both through, using the last of her air to propel them upward. She should have followed. But something caught her leg. The strap of her vest snagged on a metal rod. Her lungs convulsed. Pain spiked down her ribs. Her vision narrowed. Not again, not here. She yanked once, nothing. Twice, still stuck. She could hear her own heartbeat hammering like sonar. 60 seconds. She could picture Reed above, watching the stopwatch, jaw locked. She tried once more, twisting her body sideways, forcing the strap loose. It tore free. 75 seconds. She kicked upward hard, lungs screaming, chest on fire. The light above shimmered, too far, too dim. She thought she wouldn't make it. Thought maybe this was the moment silence finally claimed her for good. And then she broke the surface. Rain and wind exploded into her senses. Hands grabbed her, pulling her onto the pier. She collapsed, coughing seawater, chest heaving, ribs screaming with every breath. Reed crouched beside her, shaking his head, soaked and furious. You said 120. You surfaced at 118. She managed a weak grin. Always keep them guessing. Morales was already treating the rescued crew. All four alive. Hypothermic but breathing. Alive. That word echoed in her skull, long after the storm began to ease. Alive. Hours later, when the chaos settled and the medics took the injured to the infirmary, Isla sat alone under the shelter of the hangar awning. The storm had passed, but the sea still writhed, restless under the breaking dawn. Her uniform clung to her skin, heavy with salt. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. Reed approached quietly, carrying 2 mugs of something steaming. Coffee, he said. Barely qualifies, but it's hot. She took it, sipping without a word. The warmth bit at her tongue, grounding her. Command called, he said after a while. They heard about the rescue. Let me guess, she murmured. Protocol violation. Protocol miracle, he said. Ellis filed a commendation instead of a complaint. Havers apparently called you proof that empathy can be tactical. His words, not mine. She laughed softly, a sound half disbelief, half exhaustion. That's a first. He studied her face for a long moment. Why do you keep doing this, Isla? Every time you should rest, you dive back in. She stared at the horizon. The clouds were breaking apart, thin lines of gold between them. Because every time I hold my breath, she said quietly, I remember the ones who never surfaced, and I owe them another second. He nodded slowly, eyes soft, and when the seconds run out. She looked down at her hands, still shaking. Then someone else keeps count. They sat there in silence, listening to the sea reclaim its rhythm. The air was cleaner now, washed, almost gentle. Morales approached from the infirmary. Crew's stable, she said. You should get checked too. Isla shook her head. Later. Morales hesitated. They said one of them asked who pulled him out, said he saw someone holding his hand under the water. Isla smiled faintly. Then maybe he saw what belief looks like. Morales nodded and left them. The hangar went quiet again, the kind of quiet that didn't hurt anymore. Reed broke it softly. You know, they'll probably name the new resilience program after you. She smirked. Let's hope they pick a better acronym. He chuckled, then turned serious. You changed them, Isla. You changed all of us. She didn't answer, just looked at the horizon, the light now full, the sky clearing. Her body ached, every muscle protesting. Her chest burned with each breath, but for once it wasn't pain, it was proof. Later that morning, the recruits gathered near the pool again. Training postponed, yet nobody wanted to leave. The storm had left debris scattered across the deck, palm branches, loose gear, but they stood anyway, waiting. Isla walked up slowly, voice hoarse but clear. You all know what happened last night. You know what could have. She paused, scanning their faces, tired, determined, alive. Control doesn't mean defying fear. It means trusting yourself inside it. The ocean will always try to take you. Life will too. But as long as you remember why you're holding your breath, you'll always find your way back up. Silence followed, not empty but full, the kind that carried weight and meaning. Ethan Vale stepped forward, voice quiet. Ma'am, what happens when someone ca? She looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, then someone else dives. The recruits nodded. Some smiled, some cried. Reed watched from the back, his chest tight with something he didn't have a name for, pride, grief, both. When the briefing ended, Isla lingered by the water again. The pool was still, unusually so, like it too was listening. She knelt, touched the surface, and whispered, For all of you who couldn't breathe, I still can. The reflection rippled, sunlight breaking it into fragments. Behind her, Reed called, You ready to rest yet? She smiled faintly without turning. Rest isn't silence, Deacon, it's peace. I'm getting there. He grinned, finally. As she stood, a breeze swept across the compound, carrying the scent of salt and morning. The storm had scrubbed the sky clean. The ocean glittered, vast and forgiving. She closed her eyes for a moment, inhaled deep. Not to test endurance, not to prove survival. Just to live. And when she exhaled, it wasn't a soldier breathing out anymore. It was a woman, whole human, unafraid of the quiet she'd once drowned in. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And the world listens in silence,